Hello, my name is Ida.
Hi, my name is Nora.
Hello, my name is Dadme.
My name is Ryan.
And welcome to Sedaye Daneshjoo. For today's episode, we're going to be talking about something that a lot of young people today are either navigating right now, which is how to communicate with your peers who have different opinions or beliefs while still trying to stay connected with each other and having that sense of community. We know that conversations can easily turn into arguments and people can get frustrated, emotions can get high, intense, and it drives us away from our goal and our main point, and we lose that sense of community, especially with the youth today. There are plenty of studies out today saying that compared to the 90s, that the number of average friends someone has dropped. Before it used to be about 5 friends, but now the average best friend someone has is close to 1. And so we wanted to explore simple questions on how can young people talk about important topics even when they disagree while remaining respectful with each other. So for our first question I have is, when you hear the idea of communicating across differences, what does that mean to you?
This is a very interesting topic, and I think it's very important that we are talking about this. So communicating across disagreements and across conflicts is a skill that everyone needs to develop. To me, this basically comes down to each person's lived experiences, and for example, it's the experiences of a person, for example, who has lived in Iran, for example, in their whole life, is totally different from someone who has lived in the U.S. for their whole life, and it's very possible and completely, it makes a lot of sense that they would see the world differently. And when such conflict happens and such arguments happen, I think it boils a lot down to what each person has gone through in their lives, and what they have seen, what they have been told by other people throughout the whole lives, like through childhood, through young adulthood. And it's all those little things that add up and make that person's viewpoint and perspective. So it's important to take that into consideration when you're trying to communicate with other people with different perspectives. Just know, or at least try to understand where their experience is coming from, where their viewpoint is coming from. And maybe through that you can navigate through this conflict and resolve the conflict through effective communication.
Yeah, I like that, sort of like a psychoanalyzing everyone's whole lifetime, their whole perspectives, and taking a really holistic approach on understanding their perspectives and what brought them here today. I think that's super important to share, of course. I guess a follow-up, the next question I have for that is, why do you think that these conversations about opinions, belief, turn to arguments so quickly?
I think that people, especially if it's a topic that's very sensitive to them, something that hits very close to home, they may be passionate, they may feel like it's attacking them personally, and they feel the need to be heard in that sort of conversation. I also think something like this can tie into medicine, where maybe once you're a physician or a healthcare worker, you may have someone with religious beliefs or personal beliefs that differ from yours, and that would affect the kind of care you give them. I think ultimately the most important thing is to remain respectful. Sometimes you are able to have a resolution, but sometimes you sort of need to agree to disagree and just understand their perspective.
Yeah, no, I think oftentimes when it tenses up, I think depends on the conflict. But if it's a conflict about another issue that's not directly about the individual, then I think when it gets tense, it's because that person perceives it as an attack on them. And when someone goes against your beliefs or says something completely opposite, then I think naturally people can be taken back by that, and that shock of, oh, you're not on my side, you don't see the same viewpoints as me. I think that's what kind of makes the argument churn quickly. I think it's important to remember that, of course, people are going to have different opinions, different beliefs. You're going to meet all sorts of people with all types of beliefs about anything. And I think just remembering that, I think depending on the conflict, if they are personally attacking you, then that is a personal attack. But I mean, if it's about another issue, then I think when it's perceived as a personal attack and it's deep, I think that's when it gets tense, and then the other person feels the same way, and then it's just a back and forth, and then it escalates a lot. So I think that's what really causes it. I think it feels personal a lot of times. Our beliefs and our opinions are very deep and dear to us, and I think that's probably what goes into it. Another question that I have for that is, have you ever had a conversation with someone who strongly disagreed with you, but you still remained respectful and tried to keep the conversation productive?
Yeah, I have an anecdote I'd like to share to this same idea of productive conversation with someone that you disagree with. And this, as we shared these questions before filming, it got me thinking immediately to the healthcare pertinence of this question, or this line of questioning: how to deal with specifically interpersonal themed conflict in a healthcare setting. So for years I was an EMT in college, and I worked part-time. I did higher acuity, lower acuity, and one thing I noted, and this was the most exposure that I've gotten to varied healthcare personnel, is that in terms of conflict mediation, you would think that people that have this baseline assumed level of empathy, that these people would be well adjusted, so there'd be no problems. We're all working towards a common goal. I couldn't have been further from the truth. It turns out that a lot of what I would call sociopathic tendency possessing people slip through the cracks into healthcare. And it's not that they lack, or rather it is that they also lack a baseline level of empathy or compassion, that somehow they were able to slip through the cracks. I see this in younger personnel, but also the older and more experienced personnel. I mean, we are put in proximity to PTSD, borderline PTSD inducing events on a regular basis. And so, hey, charge nurse, my tummy hurts. I have a headache. Oh, really? Wow. Tough. I just had to do CPR or one of my personnel, one of my underlings just did CPR for 40 minutes on a father of two with a wife, and they just watched their father die in my underling's arms, and I had to deal with the social repercussions of that. How are you doing today? And so one such interpersonal conflict, I'd like to just steer back to my own experience specifically. I had this one interfacility transport shift. This was when I was at this point a more senior EMT, and I was working a late night shift. All right, we were supposed to be off an hour ago. We just finished up a call. I have this young EMT with me who's been complaining. Oh my gosh, the whole shift. I'll never forget this employee. I worked with her only a few times, but each time was a drag. I hate this company. Man, all the people at this company are sissies. I can't wait to go join the 911 dedicated company. It's like, there's 911 shifts at this company. Have you tried those? No, I don't want to do the strike teams. Excuses. And so you'll see elements of, depending on your background, depending on your awareness of your own ignorance, your own previous, that would be your privilege, eligibility for certain things based on your SES, that other people don't take, that you might take for granted. The requirements to be a nurse or a PA or MD, DO are the same for everyone. And so lots of different people, this is why diversity matters, not just in representation for patients, but representation for providers, that we become more socially aware people. But this person was very entitled. And so I fundamentally disagreed with what she was saying, but, is it really my job to reprimand her, try to, get her to see a different way? Well, the main lesson of this story is sometimes you can't fix people. You can't move past conflict because it is a core misalignment of reasoning, and it's not worth my time and my energy. But so we get this call 1 hour past our end of shift time. Oh gosh. Oh. We're transporting a patient from an hour drive north in Fountain Valley to 2.5 hours south to San Diego and then back. Oh, okay. We were supposed to be off at 11. We might get off at 4 in the morning. And I have class tomorrow. And then I have more stuff to do later. I'm going to be up for maybe 30 hours. And this person, this is their full-time job. They signed up for this. The first things out of her mouth, of course, this made me mad. I have 2 stories I'd like to share if we have time, but this is my predator story. This is where I was steaming from the ears, just listening. And it was interpersonal. It was things that, yes, I like to think I'm well regulated. I'd like to think I'm not a sociopath slipping through the cracks, even though sometimes I lack empathy in situations where I feel like I should have more. Naturally. But this was an instance where this borderline disregard for the meaning of our job and the lack of meaning in this job, and it trickled down into all aspects of patient care. For example, when we got there, we were wheeling the gurney. Yes, we're tired. Yes, etc. But I'm pulling the gurney and she's pushing the gurney. If you're familiar with EMS operations, this is a very basic thing. Person pulling steers. The person pushing provides the power to move the gurney. Basic stuff. I'm pulling, I'm getting a bicep workout here. And so to prove a point to this junior EMT and maybe give grounds for an actual reprimanding, I let go of the gurney. And we're moving on carpet, high friction. It stops. She wasn't pushing at all. So not only was she complaining about how, and I'm realizing I'm not fully over this situation either, that I haven't fully forgiven her for this. Not only was she complaining about how bad this company was and how awesome she was and how she needed to be working at a more higher acuity company, but she wasn't even putting in the basic effort to show that she had the experience and the aptitudes to go and do that. Some things you just cannot, sometimes you can't get through to people. And those traits are like a poison. That person would lie about knowing languages and would try to handle patient care and then let other people, myself, carry them through those situations. You can't, at a certain point, you have to set aside your differences. And sometimes, just as in any group project and in any interpersonal conflict, you just have to be the bigger person and realize that you are serving a mission greater than yourself, especially in the healthcare context. So I just wanted to share that.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. I can tell that it was not an easy situation to be in. I was wondering, in that situation, what did you end up talking to them, or did you end up just, how did you navigate that conflict in that situation?
I like to think that I'm a nice coworker. I'm pretty blunt. And so I told her straight up, first it was something light, because I think she was also testing the waters with me. How dissenting from the common view was I? And this is to say, sometimes these vastly differing opinions are things that you think are just outside the purview of common sense. No, I don't hate my job. And, trying to just show that I feel a certain way or another. And then she just kept pushing. Sometimes people will do that. People that are very antagonizing. And that's where I think it's really important we at least recognize that patience is a virtue, and you just have to be able to put aside your personal feelings sometimes. And honestly, after doing that, I had a much more pleasant time with that person. If I could just see past certain things, and I'd like to think that those lessons of growing in self-awareness and in ignorance were impactful and changed the way that she handled patient care, especially not necessarily view of her own self-worth or the prestige of the company or our job, but her own value of herself and her role in that. But
Yeah.
also,
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think sometimes you have to protect your peace. You have to be the bigger person. And I think definitely in those situations like that, that's something that's important in those conflicts, and that is an option. Sometimes you really have to protect your peace. There's some like conflicts where, however, it turns into yelling back and forth, and you pass the point where you cannot protect your peace anymore, and you're trying to get through to that person. But before we get there, I was wondering, what are some signs that you guys notice before a conversation starts getting to that point? When it starts getting tense and you start noticing that, oh, this is no longer a conversation, this is turning into almost an argument.
Mm-hmm. It's often like, kind of like Ryan said, like the the steam coming out of the ears. You start to feel a little bit angry or a little bit frustrated, maybe like you're not getting through to the person. The conversation gets more passionate. What I personally like to do is I give myself a 5 or 10 minute cooling off period when I realize I'm getting frustrated, because when you react out of emotion, that's when the conversation just doesn't lead somewhere productive. It's okay to have difficult conversations and have conflict, but taking that second to gather your thoughts, gather your emotions, and having a productive confrontation or conversation makes it go a lot smoother, in my experience.
To me personally, I have relatively a lot of patience. So when the conversation gets to that point that it feels like an argument, I can argue without raising my voice or getting too heated easily, but I find that very often it happens that the other party will not keep the patience and exactly. So when I feel like that there is a wall put up, and if the other person is getting defensive, or if I feel defensive, if I'm like, okay, I'm just arguing to just to be right. And me being right is not gonna go anywhere. It's not gonna lead to any positive outcomes. And I think it's a very hard skill to develop, and I'm still working on that. It's not an easy skill to figure out, okay, there is a wall here. Whatever I say is going to hit that wall. There's no way that I can get through that wall right now. The methods to overcome it is one that you mentioned, to take a breather. That's one. One that I often use is to try to ground ourselves. I guess I'm kind of going into the resolution, how to resolve these conflicts and make them less heated, but try to ground ourselves in the common goals that we have. And what, based on what Ryan was mentioning, it's very hard in that scenario, because you kind of don't really have common goals at that point. If you care about like transferring that patient and like getting things done, and the other person doesn't really care much, it becomes very hard to resolve that conflict, and that's when it's important to like keep your peace and try to like back away, but grounding ourselves and sharing common goals is going to be very handy when it comes to resolving conflicts, because at the end of the day, in most conflicts, you both are going to have the same goal, but based on your experiences, based on your lived experiences, you just have different methods of reaching that goal. And
I wanted to add to that also.
Yeah, go ahead.
Different methods to reach a goal. So this got me thinking, that exact thing got me thinking about conflict resolution when it is an objective, a serious one, where we both have a common goal. In my opinion, it is a balance. In one part, it's a balance between having a backbone and, despite how angry, you have to be self-regulating and control your emotions, but sometimes people will just walk all over you if you don't show that you care. And knowing the balance of having a backbone and knowing when you're wrong, knowing that you are fallible.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot that goes into conflicts and navigating them, and like you said, sharing a common goal is really helpful. I also think that if you share different opinions and beliefs, one of the only ways you can be heard is if you keep it respectful, keep that conversation calm and respectful as you can, because you're likely not going to have your opinion heard when there's a lot of conflicts, it's tense, and it's difficult. I feel like we could talk about this forever. But I think just keeping that peace, that calm, making sure you're listening to what they're saying, being able to repeat it back, and like let them know that I am listening, I'm active listening to them is really important, while also sharing your perspective on it and keeping that peace. I think that helps feeling like I'm being heard in this conflict, I'm sharing my opinion and belief in the best way I can. And also brings back that sense of community, because when we have those conflicts, community is lost completely. Yeah, we could talk about this forever. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today's episodes. Thank you guys so much for listening in. Thank you to my co-hosts for sharing their experiences. And we'll see you next time on Sedaye Daneshjoo.